Welcome back to the Renaissance Face podcast, where we have the opportunity to listen and better understand life in education. I'm delighted to be speaking to Gary Hillyard, who is head of school at Carlton Academy in Nottingham. The school is part of the Redhill Academy Trust, and I'm looking forward to hearing how he juggles the various demands on his time. So, welcome, Gary. How lovely to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
Not at all. So, as I've already explained, you're obviously in the teaching profession. What was Gary's life before teaching like? Where did it all start?
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting. We've just done a careers thing at school, and that was the question they've been asked to go and find. What was your first job before teaching, and what was your last job before teaching? Well, mine was one and the same. I used to work for Dillon's, the bookshop, before it became Waterstones. They took over midway through my time there. So yeah, I was a bookseller for about 5 years, I think it was. Initially working kind of travel and science books, and then made my way up to fiction, which was where my kind of heart and passion was. So yeah, bookseller for about 5 years.
Beautifully segued into your reading passion and what you're obviously now looking at. So I've got a few things I'd like to find out about you and about Carlton and the Redhill Trust generally, and obviously around reading and in English. Let's just start off though with technology. There's obviously lots of thoughts on turning the page, and I come from a primary background, so I'm very much in that camp, although I can see the benefits of technology. Would you like to talk about that for a little while?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely the benefits of technology, certainly in terms of engaging students in a medium that they're certainly much more familiar with in some aspects. And I suppose the adage of some reading is better than no reading there as well. So it's good that they have access to online text, and sometimes we do encourage that as part of the work that we do in some schools. And it's good that they're kind of exposed to even elements of, although I'm not a great fan of it, elements of social media and news online and news feeds. So that in itself, that access to material, particularly, for certain groups of students, does mean that some element of reading is happening. My caution is always around the validity of what is out there, and tooling students up with the ability to unpick the validity of what's out there. And that's the upside of kind of elements of social media and news online, is that they're possibly accessing it. The downside is who's checking the credibility and the validity of what our young people are reading. And that kind of
fake news,
illiteracy, that ability, fake news, the ability to be critically literate, it is certainly something that concerns me a little bit there as well. It's the same with AI, I suppose, as well, in the sense that from a teaching perspective, the AI is a great workload saving device, and I think it's a really great tool to help staff to put materials together. I mean, when I was a younger teacher many moons ago, I'd spend all day hunting for the right resource or the right piece of reading, or reading that was pitched at the right level for the young people that I've got. And now, with the relevant checks in place, you can produce that quite quickly and quite easily using AI, and being able to differentiate at a much quicker level than somebody who's having to take a text of a reading age of around 16 and wanting to use it with an age group of around 10 to 11. That is much more speedy now, and it's much more accessible to teachers. Again, I suppose my note of caution is that reading is not just about the words on the page, it's about the intention of the words on the page. And the downside of AI is that you sometimes miss the authenticity of the text. It's very clinical in its approach. I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not scared of technology, and I think it's got its benefits, but I think certainly from a reading perspective, you need to just balance it a little bit with the continued use of paper-based text and authentic text, even if they are online, authentic texts that were written with a really, really clear purpose behind them. But equally, I'm all for any opportunity to get students to read, whether it be technology-based or not.
Definitely. It's interesting that you're talking about sort of authenticity and also the potential of AI. I was in a meeting yesterday at a trust, a primary school, and the example they gave And I'm sure with the teaching profession, the education space within which we're speaking, people will understand immediately one of the big downsides that you've also alluded to. A primary school teacher was using AI to demonstrate to children how it works. And she put in the text that children had written to generate a picture, which sounds absolutely wonderful, doesn't it? And it is indeed beautiful the way it does that. But the downside of that is, of course, it isn't intelligent enough to take account of handwriting and misspelling. And apparently there was this example given. And I thought that was such a lovely example of how stunning AI can be. But the downside is it needs a human in the loop. It needs a teacher and a profession that understands its benefits and its pitfalls.
100%. And also from a reading point of view, I always found the beauty of being able to read a book and visualize it in my own head, the power of reading as well. And
Yes.
actually, tools like that take away that, and it takes away that imagination. And it's that old adage around watching an adaptation of a book after you've read the book. Does it match your vision and visual of it? And I wouldn't want to lose that for young people to
No.
have the image created for them, when
Yes.
actually it's the words and the power of the words that should be creating that image in their own head.
And giving them the potential to articulate in their own words and picture things as a result of vocabulary use and all of those things. And we could talk for hours on that. I'm absolutely certain. So hand in hand with that actually comes around that whole storytelling, that oral offering that teachers should be doing every day if possible. And I think in a primary school, it's almost an obvious thing that at the end of the day, you finish with a story. How does that work in a secondary space? Because you've got different teachers, different subject specialisms and periods.
It's something we've been working on actually for the last couple of years, and we've still got some work to do around particularly developing student fluency by modelling good fluency to them. The way we've encouraged staff to do it is to really think around the texts that are in front of them and the purpose of the author, and to really be thinking about how each sentence is phrased, etc. So my background is history. I'm a history teacher, and so very much looking at historical sources and reading them out as they were intended to come across to somebody, with the right level of emphasis, with the pauses, with the level of identifying particular words that become the real focus of what you're saying. And what we've encouraged staff to do is to do that more often before students actually get into the text to start analysing it. One of the most powerful things I think I ever did was I did a string of assemblies years back. I actually did it with staff a few years ago as well. And I read some letters from a book called The Legacy Letters, and they are letters written by family members or relatives of people who died during 9/11. And they're writing to their deceased. It was part of a project that was run 10 years after the event, and they were writing to try and put down their emotions of how they felt about. And I read 3 letters to a set of year groups, and I got choked up every time I read them. And staff did. I didn't warn anybody that this was going to happen. And just the point I was trying to make was, even in non-fiction, if you read it as it's intended, it brings emotion, it brings visual, it brings that kind of feeling that if you're just reading with a plain monotone, you don't get, or if you're just reading the words on a page, you don't get. And so it's trying to share with staff examples of how non-fiction can be read in a way that kind of demonstrates that emotion.
And I think that's so interesting, because with my primary hat on, I know that we as a staff always used to talk about prosody, and how actually that ability to better understand whether a child is fluent or not is so easily recognized when they are identifying the punctuation and they are able to give that emotion to the language that they're speaking out loud.
It also intimately ties in the writing process, because I think we too often treat reading and writing as separate entities. But actually, by reading a sentence which is poorly punctuated and changes the whole meaning, but you're saying it out loud because that punctuation isn't there, I think really alerts a young person to how something's supposed to be written as well. And so I think there's, we have as a trust focus very much on reading all for the right reasons, and I don't dispute that in any way, shape, and form. some of the work we started to do is to say, well, how does that reading, and very much around the EEF framework, how does that reading link to writing as well, and how can one help to improve the other? And I think that's something which secondary schools can focus on too.
I know I've heard a colleague talk about poetry being a gift for children, especially at secondary, where they may not feel very confident to offer an opinion, but with poetry, there is no right answer. And that's a nice example as well, because reading the poetry around the stanzas and around the fact that there's punctuation, and sometimes not, where are you going to breathe? Where are you going to put the emphasis?
Yeah, very, very much so. And obviously that's an intimate part of the curriculum anyway, particularly at GCSE. But I know schools build that kind of development of analysing poems right from year 7 right the way upwards, where they're dealing with one and then they're starting to compare and moving it up to that kind of higher level set of skills that they'll get at GCSE.
I'd like to talk maybe after this around your role in the trust. But before we do that, I know that as a trust, you're very keen to encourage children to talk about reading, to talk about their experience around reading, and that whole area of student voice. How did that evolve, and where are you on that journey?
So I think we used to do, right at the start when we started this, we used to do kind of paper-based student surveys just to get a flavour. We used to do it at the start of year 7, and I think we used to do it at the end of year 7. And the idea was to try and judge whether if feelings around reading had changed across the course of the year. And the point of doing that was that we were quite new at the start to having a kind of whole school approach to reading outside of curriculum. And we wanted to make sure it was certainly having an impact on pupils' interest in reading. So we used to ask about how often they read, whether they enjoyed reading, whether that enjoyment changed over time. So it was very basic. I think it was about 4 questions, very simple, just to get a kind of feel. And then when we go into schools to do quality assurance, so we have a quality assurance around our reading program to make sure it's having an impact. There's always a student voice as part of that, chosen by the school, a couple from every year group. They all read to me, and then they're asked about their general idea of reading. Is it improved or not since primary, etc. So it's always been quite important, because ultimately what we're deciding is for, probably across our trust, 1,000, 2,000 plus students. We're deciding this is how we're going to approach reading with you, and to develop that love of reading. And then that morphed a little bit. I think it was 3 years ago we did it for the first time. It may have been 2, maybe 3. As part of our work with the AR consultancy team, they actually put together a much wider survey, an electronic survey for us, much more in depth, drilling down not only into the questions we were asking, because part of that consultancy was about, well, what do you want out of it? There are certain things we'd quite like to have out of it, but what do you want out of it? So between the two of us, we kind of put an amalgam of what we were doing with what Renaissance wanted to learn as well. And so it ranged from where do people read to the types of book they read, how often, the drilling down into the actual books they're reading, so we can get a gauge of what students are reading across the piece. And so we've done that for the last couple of years, and it's been really insightful. It's always dangerous, isn't it, doing not dangerous is the wrong word, but always kind of scary is the right word, scary doing a tune-up, because you invest a lot of things, and you think you know what you're doing, and you think you know what's best, and you start thinking, well, what am I going to get back? It's really insightful, because, we know we're never going to get 100% of students saying they love reading, etc. But actually, I think the last survey, I've got the figures here, I think the last survey had something like 37 negative comments, and then over 350 positive, encouraging comments around their love of reading, etc. And this was a broad range in total.
So sort of 90% positive then, pretty much.
Yeah, very much so. And I think we had in total 1,376 students, so 1,400 students. Not everybody made comments, so those 2 figures were about the comments that were made.
Yeah.
But of those, 400 made comments, of which over 350 were positive. So it was really, really, really kind of eye-opening in terms of that. And what I really got out of it, there were lots of things around reading habits, and that possibly didn't tell us more than we knew already, in the sense that we know that some of our students don't read at home. We are the place where they read, which is the importance of why we do what we do. But it was those kind of positives around. The students said, what could we do more? And actually, we had things like invest even more time in reading. That's coming from the young person. They liked teachers reading in front of them. They actually wanted reading to be an extension task after they'd finished their work. They wanted the opportunity to continue their reading. They wanted longer dear time. We do 15 minutes every day in 7 and 8, and they wanted more dear time. So, it was really, really good to see that they valued the reading that they got in school, and that they wanted it to continue, and for some, they wanted more of it.
Well, to get that sort of first-hand feedback from a group who are easily lumped together as truculent and disinterested and, oh, this is boring. I mean, how lovely. What wonderful evidence.
Yeah, very much so. And it just shows you there is an appetite out there, and it's just trying to hook into that appetite and finding that right book for young people. We had one trust school who actually actively went out of their way to give reward points for any reading they saw. So if they saw somebody reading on a bench in the lunch queue or in the lunch area, they'd give a positive point for it. So everything was about saying, this is amazing reading. This is great, building up that culture of a love of picking up a book and running with it.
Yeah, I love that idea. I've seen that in a primary school where all the staff had vouchers, and if the children were caught reading, that was the phrase they used.
It's like the other thing as well in terms of, and I know that's not sort of the same thing, but we've literally got upstairs now James Green's upstairs now in our library with over 100 trust students, because every year the librarian has put together the equivalent of the Booker Prize. It's the Redhill Trust Reading Award, the Book Award, sorry. She selects 6 Key Stage 2-ish books, 6 Key Stage 3-ish books, and each school puts together a group of people who review them. They take a vote on, favourite front cover, best opening line, best blurb, and then they've come together to do the awards upstairs, and he's up there now with them, because what helps to build that culture that we see out of the surveys is that it's not just reading in a library, it's about those bigger events. It's about, we have a patron of reading, for example. So the author Lisa Williamson is our trust patron of reading. She comes in and does events across the trust. We have celebration events at the end of the year. It's developing that love, but then taking on board the comments from the students to continue to make those developments in each of our trust schools to continue that love in the future.
Sounds fantastic. And lovely to hear you mentioning the librarian, who I would say it's unusual for a secondary school not to have a librarian. In primaries, it's not so common. But what an important hub that library must be and is. So children have a place to go where they know they can get a book and find a book and sit and read a book even.
There's been a lot of effort and time put into the trust libraries. I mean, across the 10 trust schools, I can't comment on the libraries at secondary, primary, because I haven't been to see them all, but I've visited pretty much all of the trust libraries now. And they're amazing spaces. So much time and effort put into making them the best possible space that they could be. On our open evenings here at Carlton, we've had comments like, this is better than Waterstones, as they walk in and they see the hanging displays and the books out. And, it's about building that love for the very, very first moment. And we have got a really great team of librarians that do that across the 10 secondary schools.
So finally, Gary, thank you. This has been amazing, so insightful and so lovely to hear everything that's going on. I quickly mentioned that you were leading across the trust. That's easy to say. What does that actually look like when you've got 10 schools, 10 buildings, and you're sitting in one of them with a not insignificant role in the one that you're sitting in? Explain that to me a little bit. Describe that a little bit.
Different facets really of it in terms of that. So what we've got is what we call our reading curriculum that currently covers the 10 secondary schools, although we're currently working on expanding that to being a through curriculum from EYFS right the way through to post-16. And these are kind of our bare minimum expectations of what reading looks like across the map. So across 10 secondary schools, I mean, fundamental to that is AR. Every year 7 and 8 pupil has an hour in the library every week doing an AR lesson, and they use the AR program as a stimulus, but that's about the reading that goes with that and the competitions around, successful targeting, successful quizzing. And then wider than that, the most recent body of work has been about leading on what reading looks like in a classroom. So we'd got to the state where actually we'd got a system in place using accelerated reader, 15 minutes of dear time every day for years 7, 8, 9 for a bit, although we changed the way our approach to that, plus looking at high quality literacy intervention. And we got to the point whereby that was having a really nice impact. You could see the reading ages moving forward. Loaning figures were great for the libraries. But we felt we were reaching a bit of a plateau because that's 1 hour a week. Well, 2 hours, I suppose, if you include your reading time. And what we really wanted was actually readings everywhere. So the next big push was around leading on reading in the classroom, techniques for reading in the classroom, good choice in the classroom, and making sure that everybody is a teacher of reading, and that actually reading in history is very different to reading in science, which is very different to reading in maths, which is very different to reading in English. And so helping subjects to understand what is the purpose of their reading, and then how do you teach students to read like an academic as opposed to just read. So my role is overseeing that. It's overseeing the data and really wrestling with the data. It's overseeing the trust-wide event. So each year we have a cross-trust event. So we've currently got the readathon happening. So we work with a charity called Read for Good, and we've raised around, over the last 4 years, I think it's around £14,000 across the trust for that charity. And that money goes to local hospitals to provide authors and books for children in long and short-term care in hospital. So we're currently in the heart of that. We have a book quiz every year, a reading quiz. Every single student takes part, starts in tutors, then to houses, then to the school. And then they come together at the end of the year, teams of 5 from each secondary school and primary school now, compete against each other at the end of the year. We have our Dreadlock Alien event. I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning his name. He's a performance poet from Birmingham, and he comes and our top 10 year 7 students who've made progress, but we don't define what progress means. So it could be reading age, but it could be hated reading to loving reading. It could be lack of confidence to good confidence, not associated with age. And they basically, by the end of it, they're all performing poems to each other, live performance kind of poetry to each other. So building up that is another facet of what we do across the trust. And then it's the CPD side of things, which we haven't done anything in the last kind of 12 or so months, but we did have a big push a couple of years ago where it was the driver for CPD across the trust. And it was about how you're reading your subject areas, how do you develop that? So all of those bits and pieces really form part of my role.
So not much at all, really. I mean,
No,
I can see how you manage
absolutely.
it. It's so easy. I mean, totaling that lot must be a breeze. What do you run? Do you go around on a scooter or something? I mean, you must be just
Yeah.
incredible.
There's 10 of me, but no, I think what's really important in that though is that, and it is a lot, but actually there's there's a big reliance on a core team as well in each of the schools. So each school has a senior leader that's responsible for reading as part of their portfolio. With them, they've got a literary coordinator. We've already talked about the fact that each trust school's got a librarian. And then somebody from English also meets with, certainly around the data, with that team on a regular basis as well. So, and that's the important thing. Yes, I have a strategic handle over it, but actually there's really, really strong core teams in every school that are driving the agenda forward and driving the strategy forward. And I'm very blessed by the group of people that I've worked with over the course of doing this role.
And it's lovely to hear. I know there will be a lot of people nodding vigorously, especially in English departments, hearing you talk about the fact that reading is not just for the English department.
100%.
That vocabulary, that technical language, all of that stuff that makes it possible for children to develop as human beings, not just as readers.
English content. I remember a piece of research done as well from a lady called Catherine Mortimer, I think her name was, and she wrote a wonderful book on disciplinary literacy. And at first it was actually about English, and I think she'd looked through something like 6 years worth of AQA paper ones, and every single one relied upon geographical terminology. And if you didn't know the geographical terminology, you were going to struggle. And how can an English teacher do that? How can you cover all those bases? You have to rely on everybody else chipping in and supporting that as well. And I think that was really vivid for me, that level of vocabulary from other subjects was needed to be successful at English. And I think it's a really powerful message.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary. It's been absolutely fascinating. I can't believe how much we've covered from from student voice to technology to storytelling to maths and 9, 10 schools all working together. Fantastic overview of how reading should be happening and clearly is at Redhill and beyond. So thank you very much for your time, passion, and incredible knowledge.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Gary. Who knew that Waterstones could have such an impact on the teaching career? I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as me. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please take a moment to rate and review us. And don't forget that you can catch up on all previous episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for the Renaissance Space podcast. Thank you for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.